What ridiculous skill saved your life? At 8 years old, I celebrated my birthday in the middle of a winter storm, outside, looking at the clouds, when I realized I could hardly feel cold. When my parents unlocked the door and allowed me back inside, I wasn't even cold in the slightest. I didn't shiver once. I was completely fine. My doctor said it was Raynaud's syndrome gone wrong. Essentially, I evolved. My blood vessels grew stronger from the years of punishment, so instead of my circulation getting cut off, my body learned to use my blood in ways that kept me warm. I tested it first by sitting outside in a t-shirt for an hour. Nothing. Then I held ice cubes until they melted. My skin stayed pink. Home was a special kind of hell where every mistake meant getting locked outside. Forgot to wash a dish meant 2 hours on the porch. Talking back meant overnight. They loved winter because they knew it hurt more. My mom had severe allergies and kept the house sealed tight. My dad had arthritis from construction work and needed constant warmth for his joints. They ran the heat at 75 degrees and would scream if anyone touched the thermostat. So I started small. I'd crack the bathroom window behind the shower curtain just a quarter inch. They'd wake up congested and stiff but blamed it on weather changes. Then I got creative. I dampened spots on their closet walls with a spray bottle. Within 2 weeks, black mold was growing behind my mom's shoes. Her allergies went insane. She tried everything but never thought to look behind her precious designer collection. The car was almost too easy. Dad warmed it up every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. I'd sneak out at 5:30 and adjust his heating vents to blow sideways. Then I'd crack his driver window just enough to create a draft on his hands. By the time he got to work, his arthritis was so bad he couldn't hold his tools. Must be this damn weather, he'd mutter while I nodded sympathetically. But everything changed in January when they went to Hawaii and left me behind. Not with a relative or friend, just left. They disconnected the internet and took the cable box. Left $40 on the counter and a note that said, "Don't burn the house down. 7 days alone in the middle of winter." I was 13. That's when I decided to destroy them. I went to the hardware store and bought supplies with their emergency cash. Spray bottles and timers and portable fans. I spent those 7 days setting up my system. I put wet towels in the heating vents so they'd blow damp, cold air for the first 10 minutes every cycle. I cracked windows in every room but hid them behind furniture and curtains. I sprayed water on every closet wall and under every carpet edge. I even figured out how to make the smart thermostat randomly drop 5 degrees at night by messing with its programming. When they came back tanned and relaxed, I was ready. Within a week, the mold was everywhere, but only in their spaces. My room stayed perfectly dry. Mom's allergies got so severe she couldn't breathe lying down. She'd sit up gasping all night while Dad complained his joints were too stiff to sleep. They fought constantly about who kept changing the temperature and leaving windows open. I made it worse every time they punished me. Lock me out for an hour and I'd soak their mattress edge with cold water. Take away dinner and I'd put ice packs in the heating vents. They installed cameras to catch who was messing with the house, but I knew every blind spot. They hired inspectors who found mold but couldn't explain why it was only in the master bedroom and closet. Weird ventilation issue, one guy said while I stood there looking worried. By March, they were broken. Mom's doctor ordered her to move somewhere dry for her health. Dad's arthritis got so bad he went on disability. They had to sell the house at a loss because of the mysterious mold problem that kept coming back. The day before we moved, Dad found me sitting on the porch where he'd locked me out 100 times. "I know it was you," he said. His hands were too swollen to make a fist. I pulled my coat tighter even though I wasn't cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're the one who said I was too weak to handle winter." They split up after the move. Mom went to Arizona and Dad moved in with his brother who kept the heat even higher. I went to live with my grandmother who never once locked me outside. I stopped being afraid of the cold until 3 months later, that is, because that's when my grandmother kicked me out. My parents had sent her evidence that I was a psychopath. She stood there with a manila folder thick with printed emails, her weathered hands trembling. The porch light cast harsh shadows across her face as she held up page after page. Photos of spray bottles I'd hidden under the sink, screenshots of my notebooks where I documented everything, videos from hidden cameras I didn't even know they'd installed. My stomach dropped as she showed me timestamps of me adjusting vents, spraying walls, programming the thermostat. I stood frozen on her porch while she explained how my parents had contacted her weeks ago, building their case. They'd hired a private investigator who found the hardware store receipts. They'd gotten statements from the inspectors about the suspicious mold patterns. They'd even tracked down the laundromat owner from years ago who remembered a girl studying HVAC manuals at 3 a.m. My grandmother's voice shook as she told me I had 1 hour to pack. She couldn't harbor someone who'd tried to call their own parents. The word call hit me like ice water. I hadn't tried to call anyone. I'd fought back the only way I knew how. I packed mechanically, shoving clothes into a backpack while my mind raced. In the bathroom, I noticed my grandmother's arthritis medication on the counter, the same brand my father took. For a moment, I considered proving my point. One opened window, one damp towel in her heating vent. Let her see how it felt, but I left everything untouched. I wasn't going to become what they said I was. The bus station at midnight was emptier than I'd expected. I watched my breath fog in the winter air while other travelers huddled in their coats. A security guard eyed me suspiciously. 14 years old with a backpack and no adult. I bought a ticket to the next city with cash I'd saved from selling my parents' old electronics online. I texted Maya, my only friend from school. Her response came immediately. Her parents had seen the news reports my parents were spreading. They'd forbidden her from contacting me. Every bridge I had was already burning. I found a 24-hour laundromat and curled up in a corner booth. The owner, an elderly woman named Carol, found me at 3 a.m. Instead of calling the police, she brought me coffee and sat across from me. She recognized the look of someone whose parents had failed them. When she asked if I needed help, I nodded. Carol ran an underground network for runaway teens from a converted space in an abandoned mall. She needed the truth first, she explained. No judgment, just truth. So I told her everything. The years of being locked outside, the evolution of my body, the mold and the windows and the calculated destruction of my parents' health. She listened without flinching. When I finished, she simply said that survival wasn't psychopathy. She'd seen worse. She'd seen kids who'd done worse just to eat. The shelter was unlike anything I'd imagined. A dozen teens lived there, each with their own adaptation story. Jamie couldn't feel pain anymore after years of cigarette burns. Lisa heard everything after being locked in closets, her hearing sharpened by darkness and desperation. Marcus had learned to hack systems after his parents monitored his every keystroke. My parents' campaign against me escalated quickly. They filed a missing person report that painted me as a dangerous runaway with violent fantasies. Local news picked up the story. My school photo appeared on morning shows as reporters discussed the troubled teen who terrorized her sick parents. Carol showed me the legal documents my parents had filed. They were claiming permanent disability caused by the stress of raising me. They were literally profiting from their own abuse by playing victim. The paperwork showed they stood to receive thousands in monthly benefits if approved. I started documenting my side on cloud storage, building a counter case with Carol's help. Every medical record from my childhood, every teacher's note about unexplained bruises, every neighbor who'd seen me outside in the snow. My mother appeared on a popular morning show, tears streaming as she described how they'd only wanted to love me, but I was too broken. My father's interview focused on his disability, how doctors confirmed the stress from dealing with me had caused permanent damage to his joints. Then my grandmother called Carol's emergency line. She'd found old photos in a box in her attic, pictures from when I was 5, standing outside in the snow, lips blue, trying to get back in, pictures she'd taken when visiting, not understanding then what they meant. She wanted to help, but my parents had threatened her retirement home placement if she chose me over them. The other kids at the shelter understood the rage that built in me. They'd all been through their own versions of injustice, but Carol taught us to channel it differently, document everything, build cases, not revenge plots. The law might not be on our side, but public opinion could shift. My parents hired a private investigator to find me, offering a bounty for information about my whereabouts. The shelter went on lockdown. We couldn't risk anyone being spotted and followed back. I started a blog anonymously titled The Girl Who Learned Not to Feel Cold. I didn't name my parents, just told my story. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in from others who'd survived similar abuse. I wonder why the grandmother kept those photos all these years if she didn't understand what they meant back then. Something about that timing feels too convenient, finding evidence right when the parents are building their smear campaign. The blog went viral within days. My parents panicked as people began connecting dots. They hired a lawyer to sue for defamation even though I hadn't named them. They hired a reputation management firm with a contract Carol's contacts intercepted that explicitly stated the goal was to restore the victim narrative. The blog mysteriously vanished one morning, but Marcus recovered it from cached versions. We discovered my parents had hired someone to take it down, so I got creative. I planted seeds across other platforms. Old hospital records showing my hypothermia treatments. CPS reports that had been dismissed. Emergency room visits every winter until I turned 10. A local reporter started investigating. She found the pattern everyone had missed. Teachers who'd noticed frostbite, neighbors who'd called police about a child locked outside, doctors who'd begged my parents to stop the discipline. One doctor came forward, remembering how he'd suspected abuse but couldn't prove it. My parents' story began crumbling. My father claimed I'd somehow manipulated all these witnesses' memories, but then his own brother came forward, confirming he'd witnessed the abuse but had been threatened to stay quiet. The family was splitting apart. My mother developed actual allergies from the stress, her immune system attacking itself. She blamed it on my psychological warfare continuing from afar. The irony wasn't lost on anyone following the story. The narrative was shifting. People started questioning how two loving parents had raised a child who could literally no longer feel cold. Medical experts weighed in on the biological impossibility of it happening naturally. The private investigator found our shelter location through a careless moment when one of the younger kids had posted a photo near a recognizable landmark. A raid was planned for dawn. Carol prepared to evacuate everyone, but I refused to run anymore. I contacted the reporter who'd been investigating. When the investigator arrived at 6 a.m., I was sitting calmly in the mall food court with a full news crew. The cameras were already rolling. I gave my first public interview right there. I showed the scars from frostbite on my fingers. I displayed the medical records. I shared the photos my grandmother had sent. I admitted to everything. The mold, the windows, the systematic destruction of their comfort in their own home. I explained how they'd taught me winter was a weapon, and I'd simply learned to use it better than them. The interview went viral globally within hours. The hashtag, the girl who learned not to feel cold, trended across platforms. My parents' lawyer dropped them immediately, calling the case unwinnable after my public confession. CPS opened an investigation into the original abuse. The statute of limitations hadn't expired for some of the worst incidents. My father's arthritis flared severely from the stress, landing him in the hospital. Staff members who recognized him from the interview seemed to keep the room a bit cooler than necessary. My mother's new allergies worsened, her body attacking itself in a psychosomatic response to losing control. My grandmother came forward publicly, supporting me and revealing how my parents had threatened her. The family divided into camps, some supporting my parents, others finally admitting what they'd always suspected. Donations poured in from abuse survivors around the world. The shelter received enough funding to expand and help more kids. I became an unwitting symbol for everyone who'd fought back against their abusers and been labeled the villain for it. My parents lost their jobs due to the controversy. They filed for bankruptcy, blaming me for orchestrating their downfall. Then the real shock came. My grandfather's will surfaced through his lawyer. He'd left everything to me, having suspected the abuse. My parents had hidden this for years, trying to break the trust terms. The estate was worth millions from his construction business. My parents immediately claimed I'd manipulated my dying grandfather, but his lawyer had recordings. My grandfather had documented his suspicions, noting bruises and concerning behavior. He'd protected the assets specifically to keep them from my parents. The legal battle turned ugly. My parents' marriage crumbled under the pressure. They filed restraining orders against each other. My mother claimed my father had been the real abuser while she was just going along. My father released text messages showing my mother had planned the Hawaii abandonment. One text particularly stood out. Let her freeze for a week. Maybe she'll appreciate us when we get back. The public turned fully against them. I watched them destroy each other from a distance, feeling hollow rather than satisfied. Carol warned me that revenge consumed everyone, including the person seeking it. She encouraged me to build rather than destroy. I established a foundation for abuse survivors with my inheritance. My parents sued to block it, claiming the money rightfully belonged to them. The judge reviewed all the evidence and not only granted me full emancipation, but complete control of the trust. Both my parents developed autoimmune conditions from the prolonged stress. They now required exact climate control to function. Their bodies unable to regulate temperature properly. The irony was complete. They created a child who couldn't feel cold, and now they couldn't handle any temperature variation. I spoke at conferences about survival and adaptation. I told audiences I hadn't made my parents sick. Their own guilt had done what winter never could. They watched the streams from their separate apartments, each finally understanding they'd lost everything by trying to break me. Criminal charges were filed based on the pattern of abuse. The prosecutor built a case around the medical evidence and witness testimony. My parents appeared frail at preliminary hearings, playing up their health issues for sympathy, but the evidence was overwhelming. I had to testify about the years of being locked outside. The jury saw security footage a neighbor had saved showing 6-year-old me outside for 5 hours in a snowstorm. My parents' defense tried to claim it was alternative parenting, meant to build resilience. A pediatric specialist testified about the hypothermia damage evident in my early medical records and the extraordinary adaptation my body had undergone. She explained that surviving required fundamentally altering my physiology. That wasn't discipline, that was torture. The specialist's testimony hung in the courtroom air like frost. My mother shifted in her seat, her face flushed despite the room's moderate temperature. The prosecutor called her to the stand next. She broke within minutes. Her carefully constructed victim narrative crumbled as the prosecutor presented evidence of the systematic abuse. She admitted she'd been preparing me for a hard world, just as her own mother had done with heat. The courtroom learned about my maternal grandmother, who'd locked my mother in the attic during summer, believing suffering built character. 3 generations of temperature torture laid bare. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts of child abuse and endangerment. The minimum sentence was 5 years each, but the judge had discretion to impose more. At the sentencing hearing 3 weeks later, I spoke about forgiveness. I explained that I didn't forgive them, but I wouldn't let hatred freeze me either. My parents cried for the first time I could remember, their tears seeming more for themselves than for what they'd done. The judge cited extraordinary cruelty and complete lack of remorse. Maximum sentences for both, 10 years each, eligible for parole and 7 with good behavior. They'd served their time in separate facilities. Prison proved harder than they'd imagined. The climate-controlled environment that most inmates found comfortable became their new torture. After years of extreme temperature manipulation, their bodies struggled with the consistent 72 degrees. My father's arthritis worsened despite regular treatment. My mother developed severe allergies to the industrial cleaning products. Word spread quickly among inmates about their crimes. Child abusers already faced harsh treatment in prison, but parents who tortured their daughter with cold held special contempt. They found themselves isolated, avoided in the cafeteria, excluded from recreational activities. Meanwhile, my foundation grew rapidly. Carol helped me structure it properly, bringing in other survivors as staff. We focused on emergency housing for abused teens, particularly those whose bodies had adapted to survive. Jamie became our outreach coordinator, using his inability to feel pain to help identify kids hiding injuries. Lisa's enhanced hearing made her perfect for our crisis hotline, catching the subtle sounds of distress others missed. My grandmother moved to the same city, renting a small apartment near the foundation offices. We built our relationship slowly, meeting for coffee once a week. She'd bring those old photos sometimes, both of us studying them like evidence of a crime we were still solving. 1 year into their sentences, both parents requested contact through their lawyers. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. My mother's allergies in prison became life-threatening. The combination of stress, industrial chemicals, and her compromised immune system created perfect storm. My father's arthritis progressed to the point where he needed assistance with basic tasks. They blamed each other in letters that their lawyers forwarded to me unread. I published my memoir 18 months after the trial. Cold Comfort, a memoir of survival, became an immediate bestseller in our state. The book tour brought more survivors forward, each with their own adaptation stories. A boy whose parents had starved him until his metabolism slowed to hibernation levels. 10 years each for turning their kid into a human popsicle. The judge basically said, you wanted to teach about cold consequences. Here's your lesson served at exactly 72 degrees for the next decade. A girl locked in darkness until her pupils permanently dilated. We weren't freaks, we were evidence. Medical researchers from the local university approached me about studying my condition. They found genetic changes from the repeated cold exposure, markers that could help develop better hypothermia treatments. I agreed to participate, spending hours in their temperature-controlled labs while they mapped my adapted physiology. My parents' lawyers sent sent letters demanding a share of the book profits, claiming the story belonged to them too. I donated every cent to the foundation. They got nothing. They sued from prison, claiming exploitation of their story. The case was dismissed immediately, the judge noting the irony of abusers claiming exploitation. 3 years into his sentence, my father developed pneumonia. His compromised immune system, weakened by years of temperature manipulation and the stress of imprisonment, couldn't fight the infection. He died in the prison infirmary on a Tuesday morning. The prison chaplain was his only visitor in his final hours. My mother requested compassionate release to attend the funeral, denied due to flight risk. She'd been caught trying to manipulate the prison's heating system, attempting to recreate the temperature control she'd lost. I didn't attend the funeral. My grandmother went and reported back that only she and the chaplain were present. My father was buried in a state cemetery plot, no headstone beyond a simple marker with his name and dates. My mother wrote me a final letter after his death. She admitted everything but still blamed me for choosing revenge over forgiveness. She couldn't understand that survival wasn't revenge. I burned the letter unread in the same fireplace where she'd once burned my winter coat as punishment. The foundation's first-year report showed we'd prevented over 50 situations that could have led to child deaths. We'd housed 200 teens, provided medical care for adaptation conditions, connected families with appropriate resources. Every success felt like rewriting my own story. I met someone at a conference for trauma survivors, another adapter whose parents had locked them in bright rooms, leaving lights on 24 hours until their body stopped needing sleep. We understood each other's damage without explanation. Our first date was in a perfectly climate-controlled restaurant where we both noticed the thermostat before the menu. 5 years passed. My body still couldn't feel cold, but my heart had learned warmth. The foundation expanded to 3 cities. We developed training programs for teachers and doctors to recognize adaptation abuse. My grandmother and I had dinner every Sunday, building the relationship my parents had tried to destroy. The medical research progressed significantly. My adapted cells showed unique properties that could revolutionize hypothermia treatment. Local hospitals began implementing protocols based on our findings. Lives were saved because my parents had tried to destroy mine. 10 years after the trial, I received recognition from the state medical board for my contributions to hypothermia research. Standing at the podium in a summer dress despite the conference room's aggressive air conditioning, I demonstrated how my body maintained perfect temperature regardless of external conditions. The treatment derived from my adapted cells had saved thousands from freezing deaths. My mother watched from the prison hospital ward where she required exactly 5 degrees to breathe properly. Her body had become so sensitive that even half a degree variation triggered severe allergic reactions. She'd created a child who couldn't feel cold, and now she couldn't survive without precise temperature control. The revenge I'd never sought had served itself colder than any winter they'd locked me out in, but I hadn't made them sick. Their cruelty had transformed into something that warmed the world, one saved life at a time. Well, folks, that's all from me today. Appreciate you sticking around while I tossed out all my questions. Always makes things more fun. See you next time. Like the video. It helps more than you think.